The golden sun of 1875. Wyoming cast long shadows across the dusty auction block where Lillian Barrymore stood trembling, her wrists bound and her pride hanging by a thread. She had never imagined her life would come to this, being sold to the highest bidder in a frontier town after the stagecoach robbery that had left her penniless and alone. Dust swirled around her ankles as the auctioneer's booming voice described her as a fine woman suitable for housekeeping and other duties, a thinly veiled suggestion that made her stomach turn. Lillian kept her gaze fixed on the dirt beneath her worn boots, refusing to meet the hungry eyes of the crowd. The smell of whiskey and sweat permeated the air as men called out crude suggestions, and laughter rippled through the gathering. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the bidding began, each dollar amount making her future seem bleaker than before. $200, a voice called from the back. $250, shouted another. Lillian bit her lip to keep from crying. 3 weeks ago, she'd been the daughter of a Boston banker, traveling west to start a new life as a schoolteacher in Wyoming territory. Now, after bandits had taken everything, her belongings, her money, and her letters of introduction, she was being auctioned off to pay for her room and board at the local hotel where she'd been stranded. "Please don't sell me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clamor of the crowd. The auctioneer didn't hear her plea, but someone else did. From the edge of the gathering, a tall figure moved forward. The crowd parted as Hayes Northrop stepped into the circle of light. His presence commanded attention: broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, and eyes the color of a summer storm. The silver star pinned to his vest caught the sunlight. $500, he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly hushed crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $500 from the Marshal. Do I hear $550? The crowd murmured. $500 was an outrageous sum, more than enough to cover any debt she might have accrued. "Going once," the auctioneer called out, his gavel raised. "Going twice." Hayes raised his hand higher. "I'll take her forever." Confusion rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer hesitated. "Marshal, this ain't that kind of auction. We're just settling her debts." "I know exactly what kind of auction this is, Wilbur," Hayes replied, stepping onto the platform. "And I'm putting an end to it." He turned to address the crowd. "This woman is not property to be bought and sold. She's a free citizen of this territory." He placed a stack of bills in the auctioneer's hand. "This should cover what she owes. The rest can go toward building that schoolhouse the town council's been talking about for 2 years. Lillian stared up at him in disbelief as he untied her bindings, her wrists raw from the rough rope. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Because no one deserves to be sold," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The crowd dispersed, some muttering in disappointment, others nodding in grudging respect for the Marshal's actions. Lillian followed Hayes across the dusty street, her legs unsteady beneath her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said as they reached the jailhouse. "I'll find a way to repay you, I promise." Hayes shook his head. "No need. I didn't do it for repayment." He gestured toward a wooden chair beside his desk. "Sit, rest, then you can tell me your story and we'll figure out where to go from there." Lillian sank into the chair, exhaustion washing over her. "My name is Lillian Barrymore. I came from Boston to be the new teacher in Silver Creek." Hayes's expression changed. "Silver Creek? That's 2 days' ride from here." "The stagecoach was attacked 3 days ago. They took everything: my trunk, my money, my papers." She swallowed hard. "The driver was killed. I walked until I reached this town." "Whispering Pines," Hayes supplied. "Not the friendliest place for a woman alone." "I've noticed," Lillian said dryly. A ghost of a smile touched Hayes's lips. "The hotel owner, Thornton, has a habit of running up charges for stranded travelers, then suggesting they work it off. When they can't, he arranges these so-called debt auctions. I've been trying to stop him for months." "Then I'm doubly grateful you were there today." Hayes studied her for a long moment. "Silver Creek is still waiting for a teacher. I could escort you there when you're rested." Hope flickered in Lillian's chest. "But I have no proof of who I am. My letters from the school board were in my trunk. I know the chairman in Silver Creek, Oliver Davies. Good man. We'll sort it out. Hayes stood and moved to a small stove in the corner. For now you need food and rest. Tomorrow we can see about getting you some proper traveling clothes. As Hayes busied himself preparing coffee and a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Lillian watched him. He moved with an easy grace that belied his size. His hands, large and capable, handled the tin cups and plates with surprising gentleness. "How long have you been marshal here?" she asked. 3 years. He placed a steaming cup before her. "Before that, I rode with the Texas Rangers for a spell." "And before that?" Hayes's expression closed slightly. "War, like most men my age." Lillian nodded, understanding what he didn't say. The war had left its mark on everyone, even here in the Western Territories. "You're not what I expected from a frontier lawman," she said after taking a sip of the strong coffee. "And what did you expect, Miss Barrymore?" "Someone rougher, less," she searched for the right word. "Less principled." Hayes's lips quirked. "Plenty of those around too, just doing my job." "Your job doesn't include spending $500 to free strange women from auction blocks." "Perhaps not." He sat across from her, his gray eyes meeting hers. "But my conscience does." Something shifted in the air between them, a quiet understanding. Lillian felt tears threatening and quickly blinked them away. She would not break down now, not after everything she had endured. "You can take the cot in the cell tonight," Hayes said, nodding toward the single lockup at the back of the jailhouse. "Door stays open, of course. It's the safest place in town for you right now." "Thank you," Lillian said, meaning it more than she could express. That night, lying on the narrow cot, Lillian listened to the sounds of the frontier town settling into darkness. From the desk across the room, she could hear Hayes's pen scratching against paper as he worked on reports. The simple sounds of safety and normalcy brought tears to her eyes that she finally allowed to fall. Whatever happened next, she had found one good man in this wild country. It was enough to restore her faith, at least for tonight. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Lillian woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, finding Hayes already up and cooking at the small stove. "Hope you're hungry," he said without turning around. "We've got a busy day ahead." Lillian smoothed her rumpled dress as best she could and attempted to tame her chestnut hair into some semblance of order. "I feel I should warn you, Marshal Northrop. I'm not accustomed to riding long distances. I made the journey from Boston to St. Louis by train." Hayes glanced over his shoulder, amusement in his eyes. "We'll take it slow, and please, call me Hayes. Marshal sounds too formal for trail companions." "Very well, Hayes. Then you must call me Lillian." They ate breakfast in companionable silence, and afterward Hayes took her to the town's only general store. The proprietor, a shrewd-looking man named Hollis, eyed Lillian with undisguised curiosity. "Need some traveling clothes for the lady," Hayes explained, "and supplies for a 2-day journey to Silver Creek." Hollis raised an eyebrow. "Taking her there yourself, Marshal. Town'll talk." "Town always talks," Hayes replied evenly. "Miss Barrymore is the new schoolteacher for Silver Creek. I'm escorting her as part of my duties." The explanation seemed to satisfy the storekeeper, who guided Lillian to a small section of women's ready-made garments. She selected the most practical items she could find: 2 sturdy cotton dresses, a riding skirt, a warm shawl, and undergarments. Hayes added supplies to their purchases: jerky, coffee, hardtack, and ammunition for his rifle. When they reached the counter, Hayes paid without hesitation. Lillian started to protest, but he shook his head. "Consider it an advance on your teacher's salary. You can settle with me when you're established." His kindness was overwhelming. No one in Boston would have helped a stranger this way, certainly not without expecting something in return. Lillian wondered what motivated the quiet lawman. As they left the store, a commotion drew their attention to the saloon across the street. A group of rough-looking men had just dismounted, their horses lathered from hard riding. Hayes's posture changed instantly. tension replacing his easy manner. "Wait here," he told Lillian, his voice low and serious. "Who are they?" she asked, noting how his hand had moved to rest near his holstered pistol. "Trouble," Hayes replied grimly. "Bannister's gang. They've been raiding settlements up and down the territory." Lillian's heart skipped a beat. Bannister? Was he responsible for the stagecoach robbery? Hayes's eyes narrowed. "Could be. They've hit stagecoaches before." He guided her back toward the jailhouse. "Change of plans. We need to leave now before they recognize you." "Recognize me? But I never saw their faces. They wore bandanas." "Doesn't matter. If you were on that stage, you're a witness." Hayes moved with urgent purpose, gathering their supplies. "We'll head out the back way. Avoid the main street." Within 20 minutes, they had 2 horses saddled and loaded with provisions. Hayes helped Lillian mount a gentle mare, giving her brief instructions on handling the reins. His own horse was a powerful buckskin gelding that seemed as alert and watchful as its rider. They left Whispering Pines via a narrow trail behind the livery stable, avoiding the town's main street where Bannister's men were making themselves known at the saloon. Lillian's heart pounded with fear and excitement. After weeks of helplessness, she was finally moving forward, albeit in circumstances far different from what she had imagined. As the town disappeared behind them, the vast Wyoming landscape opened up rolling plains, stretching toward distant mountains, the sky an endless blue canopy above them. Despite her anxiety, Lillian felt a surge of wonder at the wild beauty surrounding them. "It's magnificent," she said, her voice soft with awe. Hayes glanced at her, something warming in his usually guarded expression. "It grows on you. Wait till you see Silver Creek. Valleys green most of the year, with the mountains rising up all around. Good place to build a life." They rode steadily through the morning, Hayes setting a pace that was brisk but manageable for a novice rider. By midday, Lillian's muscles were protesting, unaccustomed to the constant movement of horseback riding. When they stopped beside a small creek to water the horses, she nearly fell trying to dismount. Hayes caught her, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "First day's always the hardest," he said, his voice gentler than she had heard it before. "You're doing well," Lillian laughed despite her discomfort. "I doubt that very much, but thank you for the kind lie." Hayes's mouth curved into a rare smile that transformed his serious face. "Not a lie. Most city folks would be complaining by now." "Oh, I'm complaining internally, I assure you. I'm simply too well-bred to voice it." Her teasing tone surprised her. Something about Hayes made her feel comfortable enough to show glimpses of her true self, the woman behind the proper Boston facade. They ate a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack, with fresh water from the creek. Afterward, Hayes insisted she rest for a half hour before continuing. "We've made good time," he said, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "Should reach Jackson's homestead by nightfall. They'll put us up." "Friends of yours?" Hayes nodded. "Tom Jackson saved my life during the war. He and his wife Martha have a place about 10 miles ahead." As they prepared to mount up again, Hayes paused, his head tilted as though listening. His expression changed, and Lillian felt a chill run through her. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders, coming fast." He helped her onto her horse quickly. "Could be nothing, but let's not take chances." They rode at a faster pace now, Hayes leading them away from the open plain toward a line of cottonwoods following the creek. Lillian's heart hammered in her chest as she heard what Hayes had detected minutes earlier, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. "Are they following us?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Maybe, or could be they're just headed the same direction." Hayes didn't sound convinced by his own words. Either way, better safe than sorry. They reached the trees, and Hayes led them deeper into the narrow band of vegetation. The creek widened here, creating a small wooded area that offered some cover. He dismounted swiftly and helped Lillian down. "Stay with the horses. Keep them quiet." He drew his rifle from its saddle holster. "I'm going to have a look." Lillian nodded, taking the reins of both horses with trembling hands. Hayes moved silently through the trees, his movements fluid and purposeful. In that moment, she could see the Texas Ranger. He had once been a man accustomed to danger and skilled at confronting it. The minutes stretched endlessly as Lillian waited, every sound amplified by her fear. The horses sensed her anxiety, shifting restlessly despite her attempts to soothe them. When a twig snapped nearby, she nearly cried out. "It's me," Hayes's voice came softly before he appeared. 4 riders moving fast, Bannister's men from the looks of them. How can you be sure? Recognized Thornton with them. The hotel owner from Whispering Pines? Hayes nodded grimly. He must have told them about you, probably hoping for a cut if they find whatever they think you have. But I don't have anything. They took everything in the robbery. They might not believe that, or maybe they're worried you can identify them. Hayes checked his ammunition. We need to move, follow the creek north. It'll take us out of our way, but it's safer than the open trail right now. They mounted again, following the winding creek through the trees. The going was slower here, with low branches to dodge and uneven ground to navigate. Lillian's fear kept her alert despite her exhaustion. How far to your friend's homestead? She asked as the afternoon waned. Too far to reach before dark now. We'll have to make camp somewhere defensible. Hayes's expression was determined. There's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles ahead. If it's still standing, we can use it for the night. The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a crude shelter, 4 walls of rough-hewn logs with gaps between them, a sagging roof, and a dirt floor. But it had a solid door and small windows that could be defended if necessary. It's not much, but it'll do, Hayes said, helping Lillian dismount. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, stiff from hours in the saddle. Hayes steadied her with a strong arm around her waist. You all right? Lillian nodded, though every muscle in her body screamed in protest. I'll manage. Hayes tended to the horses while Lillian gathered wood for a small fire. The domestic activity helped calm her nerves, giving her something tangible to focus on besides the danger pursuing them. By the time dusk fell, they had a fire going in the cabin's crude hearth, their bedrolls spread on opposite sides of the small space, and a simple meal prepared. Do you think they're still following us? Lillian asked as they ate. Hayes considered this. Hard to say. They seemed in a hurry, might have been headed somewhere specific. But if Thornton told them about you, they'll be looking. He met her eyes across the fire. I'll keep watch tonight. You should get some rest. I doubt I could sleep knowing they might be out there. Try anyway. Tomorrow will be another long day of riding. Lillian winced at the thought. I'm not sure I'll be able to sit a horse tomorrow. Every part of me aches. An unexpected chuckle escaped Hayes. First time's always rough. I've got some liniment in my saddlebags. Might help. He rummaged through his belongings and produced a small tin. The pungent smell of camphor and wintergreen filled the cabin when he opened it. It's not fancy, but it works, he said, offering her the tin. For your legs and back. Lillian hesitated, her cheeks warming. The idea of applying the ointment to her legs was improper by any standard, but her discomfort was considerable. Hayes seemed to read her thoughts. I'll step outside. Give you some privacy. Thank you, she said softly. When he had gone, Lillian quickly hiked up her riding skirt and applied the liniment to her aching thighs and calves. The warmth of it seeped into her sore muscles almost immediately. She called Hayes back in once she was decent again. Better? He asked, settling on his bedroll with his back against the wall, rifle across his knees. Much, thank you. She paused, studying his profile in the firelight. May I ask you something personal, Hayes? He raised an eyebrow, but nodded. What made you become a lawman after the war, after the Rangers? You could have chosen an easier life. Hayes was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear. I saw too much lawlessness during the war. Men using chaos as an excuse for cruelty. His fingers absently traced the barrel of his rifle. When it ended, I couldn't just go back to normal life. Tried ranching for a while in Texas, but it didn't sit right. With the Rangers, I thought I could make a difference. And did you? A shadow crossed his face. Sometimes, not always. He looked up, meeting her gaze. When the marshal position opened in Whispering Pines, it seemed like a place that needed the law, somewhere I could maybe do some good. There was a story there, Lillian sensed, something specific that had drawn him to this particular corner of Wyoming territory. But she didn't press. Hayes was a private man. Sharing even this much seemed significant. "I think you're doing good," she said simply. "You certainly saved me." Something flickered in his gray eyes. "Get some rest, Lillian. I'll wake you if there's trouble." Despite her earlier certainty that sleep would be impossible, exhaustion soon claimed her. The last thing Lillian saw before her eyes closed was Hayes's steady presence in the firelight, watchful and resolute. She dreamed of the stagecoach robbery, the sudden stop, the shouts, the terror as masked men surrounded the vehicle. In her dream, as in reality, the driver reached for his shotgun and was killed for his bravery. But this time, when the bandits pulled her from the coach, one of them spoke, and she recognized the voice as belonging to Thornton, the hotel owner from Whispering Pines. Lillian woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in her bedroll. "What is it?" Hayes was instantly alert, his hand on his revolver. "I remember something," she said, her voice shaking. "From the robbery, one of the men, I couldn't see his face, but his voice. I think it was Thornton. He said something about checking her bags for the papers." Hayes moved closer, his expression intent. "You're sure?" "Not entirely. It was chaos, but the voice—" She shook her head. "In Whispering Pines, I didn't connect it because I only spoke to him briefly when I took the room. But in my dream just now, it sounded the same." "What papers were they looking for?" "I don't know. I was carrying letters of introduction, some personal correspondence, but nothing valuable." Lillian frowned, trying to recall details. "There was one envelope the school board chairman sent sealed with wax. I never opened it. It was to be delivered to the town council upon my arrival." Hayes's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Could be something in there they wanted, something worth killing for." "But what? I'm just a school teacher." "Maybe. Or maybe someone is using that position as cover for something else." He stood and checked the window. The first light of dawn was just beginning to brighten the eastern sky. "We should move. If they're still looking, they'll be covering the main trails to Silver Creek." They packed quickly, eating a cold breakfast as they prepared the horses. Hayes's expression was grim as he checked and rechecked his weapons. "What's our plan?" Lillian asked as they mounted up. "We need to reach Tom Jackson's place. From there, we can send word to Silver Creek about what's happening." He adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "And I need to get you somewhere safe until we figure out what Bannister's gang wants." They rode hard through the morning, following game trails and creek beds rather than the established routes. Hayes set a punishing pace, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. Lillian bore the discomfort without complaint, understanding the urgency of their situation. By mid-afternoon, they had reached rolling grassland with scattered homesteads visible in the distance. Hayes pointed toward a modest cabin with several outbuildings and corrals. "Jackson's place. We'll be safe there." As they approached, a tall man emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. When he recognized Hayes, he lowered the weapon and raised a hand in greeting. "Hayes Northrop, wasn't expecting you till next month," Tom Jackson called out, striding toward them. He was a weathered man in his 40s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Change of plans, Tom," Hayes replied as they dismounted. "Need your help." Tom's expression grew serious as he took in Lillian's exhausted state and Hayes's watchful demeanor. "Trouble?" "Could be. This is Miss Lillian Barrymore, on her way to Silver Creek to be their new teacher. We ran into some complications." "Bannister's boys?" Tom asked shrewdly. Hayes nodded. "Think they might be following us. Miss Barrymore was on a stage they robbed last week." "Well, you've come to the right place." Tom turned to Lillian with a warm smile. "My wife Martha will be pleased to have another woman to talk to. Come on inside and rest. You look done in, madam." Martha Jackson proved to be as welcoming as her husband, a plump, energetic woman with graying hair and capable hands. She took one look at Lillian and immediately set about making her comfortable. "You poor dear, riding all that way with just this grumpy marshal for company?" she clucked, settling Lillian at the kitchen table and placing a cup of hot tea in front of her. "Tom, draw a bath for our guest. And Hayes, you look like you could use some coffee and a meal yourself." While Lillian gratefully soaked in a copper tub behind a screen in the Jacksons' bedroom, she could hear the low murmur of men's voices from the kitchen as Hayes explained their situation more fully to Tom. When she emerged, dressed in a clean borrowed dress from Martha, the conversation paused. "Feeling better, Miss Barrymore?" Tom asked kindly. "Much, thank you. And please, call me Lillian." Hayes studied her with an unreadable expression. Something had shifted in him since they'd arrived at the Jackson homestead, a new tension in his shoulders, a distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Over a hearty dinner of venison stew and fresh bread, Tom shared news from the surrounding area. "Bannister's been busy lately. Hit the Wilkins place 2 weeks back, then the stage depot at Fort Bridge. Word is he's looking for something specific." "Any idea what?" Hayes asked. Tom shook his head. "Just rumors. Some say government papers, others think it's a map to a gold strike. No one knows for sure." "And Thornton from Whispering Pines? You know anything about him?" "Shifty character," Tom said, buttering another piece of bread. "Showed up about 2 years ago, bought the hotel with cash money. Always seemed too slick for a frontier businessman." Hayes's jaw tightened. "I've had my suspicions. Now I'm wondering if he's been Bannister's eyes and ears in town all along." After dinner, while Martha showed Lillian to the small guest room, Tom and Hayes stepped outside to smoke and continue their conversation in private. From the window, Lillian could see them standing in the yard, their expressions serious in the fading light. Martha noticed her watching. "Those two have been through a lot together," she said, turning down the bed. "Saved each other's lives more than once during the war." "Hayes mentioned that Tom saved him," Lillian replied. Martha smiled. "They both tell it different. According to Tom, it was Hayes who carried him 3 miles with a bullet in his leg after Shiloh." She shook her head fondly. "Stubborn men, both of them." "Has Hayes always been so—" Lillian searched for the right word. "Reserved?" "Not always. He was different before Caroline died." "Caroline?" Martha's eyes widened slightly. "He hasn't told you?" "I'm sorry, I assumed," she sighed. "It's not my place to share Hayes's past, but yes, he was married once. She died in childbirth 5 years ago, along with their baby. That's when he joined the Rangers." Lillian felt a pang of sorrow for the stoic lawman. So much of his manner made sense now, the careful distance he maintained, the shadows in his eyes. "I won't mention it," she assured Martha. "Thank you for telling me." Later that evening, when the house had quieted, Lillian heard a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Hayes standing in the hallway, his expression troubled. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly. "Of course." She stepped back, allowing him into the small room. Hayes remained standing, his hat in his hands. "I've been talking with Tom. He's offered to escort you to Silver Creek tomorrow." Lillian blinked in surprise. "You're not coming?" "I need to head back to Whispering Pines, deal with Thornton. If he's working with Bannister, I need to put a stop to it." "But it's dangerous. You said yourself Bannister has at least 4 men with him." Hayes's mouth set in a grim line. "Which is why you need to continue to Silver Creek without me. You'll be safer there." "And what about you?" Lillian took a step closer to him, surprising herself with the intensity of her concern. "Who keeps you safe while you're confronting a gang of outlaws alone?" Something flickered in Hayes's eyes, surprise, perhaps at her vehemence. "I've handled worse." "That's not an answer, it's bravado." Lillian crossed her arms. "There must be another way. Tom will get you safely to Silver Creek. The town has its own Marshal, Joseph Miller. Good man. He'll protect you while we sort this out." Lillian felt strangely betrayed. After everything they'd been through together, Hayes was passing her off to someone else's protection. It shouldn't matter, he was simply doing his job, but somehow. It did. Very well, she said stiffly, if that's what you think is best. Hayes studied her face, seeming to sense her disappointment. Lillian, He stopped, as if unsure how to continue. It's not that I don't want to see you safely to Silver Creek myself, but if Thornton is involved with Bannister, more innocent people could get hurt while I'm away. His sincerity softened her response. I understand. You have a duty to your town. Yes. He hesitated, then added quietly, but I also have a duty to you. I gave my word I'd help you, and I mean to keep it. This is just a detour. Something in his tone made Lillian's heart beat faster. Then I'll expect to see you in Silver Creek when your business in Whispering Pines is concluded. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Count on it. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Lillian joined the Jacksons and Hayes for an early breakfast, the mood subdued as they prepared for their separate journeys. Tom would take Lillian in his wagon, safer and more comfortable than horseback, for the remaining distance to Silver Creek. As they loaded the wagon, Hayes took Lillian aside, his expression serious. When you reach Silver Creek, speak only to Marshal Miller about what happened. Don't tell anyone else about the stagecoach or the sealed letter until we know more. Lillian nodded. Be careful, Hayes. Thornton and Bannister are dangerous men. I'll be fine. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small revolver. Take this. Tom will show you how to use it if necessary. Lillian accepted the weapon, surprised by its weight. I've never fired a gun before. Hopefully you won't need to, but just in case. Hayes hesitated, then added, I'll come to Silver Creek as soon as I can. I'll hold you to that, Marshal Northrop. Something softened in his eyes. Before Lillian knew what was happening, Hayes leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. Stay safe, he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. Then he was stepping back, touching the brim of his hat in a formal gesture that belied the intimacy of the moment before. Madam? Lillian watched him mount his buckskin gelding, her cheek still tingling from his kiss. As he rode away, heading southwest toward Whispering Pines, she felt a curious mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He'll be all right, Martha said, coming to stand beside her. Hayes knows how to take care of himself. I hope so, Lillian replied softly. I truly hope so. The journey to Silver Creek with Tom Jackson was uneventful, for which Lillian was grateful. They arrived the following afternoon. The small town nestled in a verdant valley just as Hayes had described. It was larger than Whispering Pines, with a proper main street lined with businesses, a church steeple rising above the rooftops, and children playing in the schoolyard. Tom drove directly to the marshal's office, where Joseph Miller received them with interest. He was an older man with a silver mustache and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Hayes Northrop sent word ahead, he said after introductions were made. Said you might be in some trouble, Miss Barrymore. Lillian explained the situation as Hayes had instructed, telling Marshal Miller about the stagecoach robbery, the sealed letter, and Thornton's possible involvement with Bannister's gang. Miller listened intently, occasionally making notes. Hayes is right to be concerned, he said when she had finished. Bannister's not the type to let things go. If he thinks you know something, he'll keep coming. But I don't know anything, Lillian insisted. I never even opened the letter. Might not matter to him, Miller said grimly. Question is, what was in that letter that's worth killing for? Tom cleared his throat. Hayes asked that we keep Miss Barrymore's presence in Silver Creek quiet until he gets here. Miller nodded. Wise precaution. We'll get you settled in at the boarding house, Miss Barrymore. Mrs. Finch runs a respectable place, and she can be trusted to be discreet. What about the teaching position? Lillian asked. It's why I came west in the first place. School board's been anxious for the new teacher to arrive. Term was supposed to start 2 weeks ago. Miller stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Might be best to delay your official introduction until Hayes gets here, and we sort this business out, for your safety. Lillian felt a pang of disappointment. She had been looking forward to beginning her new role, meeting her students, becoming part of the community, Now it seemed her arrival would be clouded in secrecy and danger. Mrs. Finch's boarding house proved to be a tidy, well-kept establishment on a quiet side street. The landlady herself was a brisk, no-nonsense widow with kind eyes and a reputation, according to Tom, for making the best apple pie in the territory. Marshal Miller explained you need a quiet stay while waiting for some papers to arrive, Mrs. Finch said as she showed Lillian to a comfortable room on the second floor. Don't you worry, dear. I won't breathe a word about you being here. Lillian thanked her, grateful for the woman's discretion even if she didn't know the full truth. After Tom departed with promises to check on her in a few days, Lillian was left alone with her thoughts and worries. The next 3 days passed slowly. Lillian kept to her room during daylight hours, venturing downstairs only for meals and brief conversations with Mrs. Finch. At night, she would sometimes sit on the small balcony outside her window, gazing at the stars and wondering how Hayes was faring in Whispering Pines. On the 4th day, Mrs. Finch brought her a visitor, Oliver Davies, chairman of the Silver Creek School Board. Marshal Miller had vouched for him, assuring Lillian that Davies could be trusted. Miss Barrymore, Davies greeted her warmly in the boarding house parlor. We've been most concerned since receiving word of your misfortune with the stagecoach. I'm relieved to see you safe and well. Thank you, Mr. Davies. I apologize for the secrecy surrounding my arrival. Davies waved away her concerns. Marshal Miller explained there may be some danger. Rest assured, your position remains open whenever you're ready to begin. He hesitated, then added, About the letter I sent with your contract. Was it among the items taken in the robbery? Lillian nodded. Yes. I never had a chance to read it. May I ask what it contained? Davies shifted uncomfortably. It was of a somewhat sensitive nature, instructions regarding certain special students who will be in your class. Special in what way? Children from the nearby Shoshone settlement, Davies explained. Part of a new government initiative to provide education to Native children. It's controversial in some quarters. Not everyone in Silver Creek supports the idea. Lillian considered this. I don't see why that would interest outlaws like Bannister. Nor do I, Davies admitted. Unless... He trailed off, brow furrowed in thought. Unless what, Mr. Davies? There was a map included with the letter. Nothing valuable, simply showing the location of the school and the Shoshone settlement for your reference. But the settlement is on land that was recently discovered to have coal deposits. Understanding dawned in Lillian's mind. And if someone wanted that land, they'd need to know exactly where to look, Davies finished grimly. The government survey hasn't been made public yet. Only a few officials know the extent of the deposits. And whoever had the map would have an advantage in claiming the land, Lillian concluded. Precisely. I'll speak with Marshal Miller immediately. Davies rose to leave. Please continue to exercise caution, Miss Barrymore. If Bannister is after those coal deposits, he won't hesitate to silence anyone who might connect him to the theft. After Davies left, Lillian paced her room restlessly. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was troubling. If Bannister had the map, he might already be planning to claim the coal-rich land, possibly by force. And Hayes was heading straight toward Bannister's accomplice in Whispering Pines, possibly without knowing the full extent of what he was dealing with. That evening, as Lillian sat on her balcony watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Leaning forward, she saw a familiar figure on a buckskin gelding riding slowly down the street. Hayes. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern as she noticed how he slumped slightly in the saddle, one arm held stiffly against his side. She hurried downstairs and out the front door just as he dismounted in front of the boarding house. "Hayes!" she called, rushing to him. "You're hurt!" He straightened with effort, his face drawn with fatigue and pain. "It's nothing serious, just a scratch." "A scratch that's bled through your coat?" Lillian observed, noticing the dark stain on his side. "Come inside. Mrs. Finch will help us tend to it." Hayes didn't argue, which told Lillian more about his condition than his dismissive words had. He leaned on her slightly as they entered the boarding house, where Mrs. Finch took one look at him and immediately began issuing orders. "Get him to the kitchen, dear. I'll fetch my medical box, Mr. Northrop. You'll sit still and let us help you if you know what's good for you." A ghost of a smile touched Hayes's lips. "Yes, madam." In the kitchen, Lillian helped Hayes remove his coat and shirt, revealing a deep gash along his ribs. It had been roughly bandaged, but the wound had reopened during his journey. "Thornton," she asked quietly as Mrs. Finch prepared hot water and clean cloths. Hayes nodded grimly. He didn't go quietly. "Is he in jail, along with two of Bannister's men who were hiding at the hotel?" Hayes winced as Mrs. Finch began cleaning his wound. "Bannister himself got away, along with his right-hand man, a fellow called Red." "Did you learn anything about the map?" Lillian asked. "Mr. Davies visited today. He thinks Bannister may be after coal deposits on Shoshone land." Hayes's expression tightened. "That fits with what Thornton told us before we locked him up. Said Bannister's planning to file mining claims as soon as the land office opens next week. With that map, he can pinpoint the richest deposits before anyone else even knows they're there." Mrs. Finch finished cleaning the wound and began applying a salve. "This needs stitching, Marshal. I've sent for the doctor." Hayes grimaced but nodded his thanks. His gray eyes found Lillian's, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her heart skip. "You've been safe here?" "Yes, thanks to Marshal Miller and Mrs. Finch. No one knows I'm in town except Mr. Davies and a few trusted others." Relief flickered across Hayes's features. "Good. Because Bannister's still out there, and he knows you're a witness. Thornton told him you recognized his voice during the robbery." "But I wasn't certain," Lillian protested. "It was just a feeling, a dream." "Doesn't matter to Bannister. He won't take chances." Hayes reached for her hand, his calloused fingers closing gently around hers. "We need to keep you safe until we catch him." The warmth of his touch sent a tremor through Lillian. "And how do you propose to do that, Marshal? I can't hide in this boarding house forever." Before Hayes could respond, the kitchen door opened to admit Dr. Evans, a brisk, efficient man who immediately took charge of the situation. While he stitched Hayes's wound, Lillian and Mrs. Finch retired to the parlor to give them privacy. "That man rode all the way from Whispering Pines with that gash in his side," Mrs. Finch remarked, shaking her head in admiration. "Must have been important business bringing him here." "Yes," Lillian agreed softly. "Important business." Later, when Hayes had been patched up and settled in a room at the boarding house, Mrs. Finch having insisted he stay where she could keep an eye on his wound, Lillian sat with him while he ate the hearty meal the landlady had prepared. "Tell me everything that happened in Whispering Pines," she urged. Hayes set down his fork with a sigh. "Got back to find Thornton acting nervous. When I started asking questions about his connection to Bannister, he pulled a gun. We struggled, and he slashed me with a knife before I could subdue him." "And the other men you arrested?" "They were holed up in rooms at the hotel. One of them had the map from your letter." Hayes reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "I brought it for Davies. It shows the coal deposits clearly marked." Lillian examined the map. The Shoshone settlement was outlined in red, with shaded areas indicating where the coal was richest. "Bannister could make a fortune with this information." "That's the plan. According to Thornton, Bannister's been working this scheme for months. The stagecoach robberies were just covering their real purpose, finding this map." "But Mr. Davies said the letter was about Shoshone children attending the school. Why would he include something so valuable with a routine correspondence?" Hayes shook his head. "Davies might not have realized its value. Or perhaps someone at the government office slipped it in with his papers. Hard to say." Lillian set the map aside. "What happens now?" "Marshal Miller's organizing a posse to track Bannister and Red. I'll join them once Doc Evans clears me." Hayes' expression darkened. "Bannister's dangerous, Lillian. As long as he's free, you're at risk." "And you're not exactly in fighting form," she pointed out, gesturing to his bandaged side. "I've had worse." "That doesn't reassure me." Lillian met his gaze steadily. Hayes, you've done enough. Let Marshal Miller and his men handle Bannister. I can't. Hayes's voice was quiet but firm. Not until I know you're safe. The simplicity of his declaration stirred something deep within Lillian. Since arriving in the West, she had been betrayed, robbed, nearly sold, and pursued by outlaws. Through it all, Hayes had been her constant protector, risking his life for a woman he barely knew. Why? She asked softly. Why is my safety so important to you? Hayes looked away, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. For a moment, Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. Because from the moment I saw you on that auction block, something changed, something I thought was dead inside me. He met her eyes again, vulnerability replacing his usual guardedness. I couldn't save Caroline, but I can save you, Lillian. I need to. Lillian's heart ached for him. Martha's words came back to her how Hayes had been different before his wife's death, how the tragedy had driven him to the Rangers and a life of enforcing justice in lawless places. You already have saved me, Hayes. More than once. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. But you don't need to do it alone, not anymore. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marshal Miller entered, his expression grim. Sorry to disturb you, but we've got trouble. Ryder just came in from the North Road. Says he saw Bannister and Red heading this way with at least 6 men. Hayes straightened, wincing slightly at the movement. When? 2 hours ago, maybe less. They'll be here by morning. Miller glanced at Lillian. Miss Barrymore, I think it's best if we move you somewhere more secure. The jail has a back room where you'd be well protected. No, Hayes said firmly. Jail's the first place they'll look. He thought for a moment. The Shoshone settlement. Davies mentioned it's about 10 miles north of here? Miller nodded. Chief Walking Bear is friendly to Silver Creek. His people might shelter Miss Barrymore until this is over. I'll take her tonight, Hayes decided. Less chance of being spotted in the dark. You're in no condition to ride, Lillian protested. I've ridden with worse, Hayes countered, and I know these mountains better than Bannister. We can use that. Miller stroked his mustache thoughtfully. It's risky, but it might be our best option. I'll gather my deputies and set up a defense of the town. If Bannister wants a fight, we'll be ready. After Miller left, Mrs. Finch helped Lillian pack a few essentials while Hayes prepared the horses. Despite his injury, he moved with purpose, checking weapons and supplies with methodical care. Are you sure about this? Lillian asked as they prepared to leave, concern evident in her voice. Your wound will hold, Hayes finished for her. Doc Evans does good work. They slipped out of town just after midnight, taking a narrow trail that wound through pine forests toward the mountains. Hayes led the way, alert despite his fatigue and pain. They rode in silence for the first hour, both aware that sound carried far in the quiet night. As they climbed higher, the air grew cooler, and the stars seemed to hang like lanterns in the vast sky. Lillian found herself drawing strength from the wild beauty surrounding them. It's strange, she said softly when Hayes signaled it was safe to talk. I came west seeking adventure and a new beginning. I certainly found it, though not in the way I expected. Hayes glanced back at her, his expression softening. Regrets? No, she replied truthfully. Despite the danger, despite everything, no. These past days have shown me what I'm capable of, what people are capable of, both the worst and the best. You've shown remarkable courage, Lillian, as have you. She urged her horse forward until she was riding beside him. Hayes, what you said back at the boarding house about Caroline. His jaw tightened. Martha told you? Just that you were married and that you lost her. Lillian chose her words carefully. I'm sorry if it brings you pain to speak of it. Hayes was silent for several moments, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but steady. Caroline was a schoolteacher, like you. We met in Texas after the war. She believed in building a future, in making something good after so much destruction. A faint smile touched his lips. She would have liked you. Lillian felt honored by the comparison. What happened? Complications with the birth. The doctor couldn't stop the bleeding. His hands tightened on the reins. I wasn't even there. Was away helping neighbors fight off rustlers. By the time I got back... Hayes, I'm so sorry. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. After that, I couldn't stay on the ranch. Too many memories. The rangers gave me purpose, a reason to keep going when I didn't much care if I lived or died. His honesty moved her deeply. And now? Do you care now? Hayes looked at her then, really looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the starlight. Yes, he said simply. I care now. The weight of his words hung between them, full of meaning neither was quite ready to voice. Lillian's heart beat faster as she realized how much had changed between them in such a short time. This man who had begun as her rescuer had become something more, someone whose presence she couldn't imagine living without. They reached the Shoshone settlement just before dawn. Sentries met them at the perimeter, initially wary until Hayes explained their situation in halting Shoshone phrases. They were escorted to the central lodge, where Chief Walking Bear, a dignified elder with deep-set eyes and silver-streaked hair, received them. Hayes spoke with the chief while Lillian waited, exhausted from the night's journey. Though she couldn't understand their words, she could see the respect with which the chief regarded Hayes. He says we can stay, Hayes told her after their conversation concluded. You'll be given shelter with the women. I'll remain here to help defend the settlement if Bannister follows us. Will he? Follow us, I mean. If he's determined enough. Hayes looked troubled. Walking Bear says there have been white men surveying the area recently. Bannister may already know about the coal deposits. They were shown to separate lodges. Lillian to stay with the chief's widowed sister, Star Woman, while Hayes would join the warriors. Before they parted, Hayes took Lillian's hands in his. Get some rest. You're safe here. And you should rest too, she urged, noting the lines of pain and fatigue etching his face. Your wound needs time to heal. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes, madam. Impulsively, Lillian leaned forward and kissed his cheek, just as he had done to her at the Jacksons' homestead. Be careful. Hayes Northrop. Something warm kindled in his eyes. Always. Star Woman proved to be a kind hostess, despite the language barrier between them. She showed Lillian to a comfortable sleeping pallet and brought her food and tea. Through gestures and the few English words she knew, the older woman made Lillian welcome in her lodge. Exhaustion soon claimed Lillian, and she slept deeply for several hours. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky. Star Woman was gone, but had left fresh water for washing and a simple dress of soft buckskin. Lillian changed gratefully out of her travel-stained clothes and ventured outside. The settlement was alive with activity, children playing, women working at cooking fires or crafts, men repairing tools and weapons. It was a peaceful scene, yet Lillian noticed the watchful sentries positioned around the perimeter. She found Hayes sitting with Chief Walking Bear and several other men near the central fire. They were studying what appeared to be a map spread on the ground between them. Hayes looked up as she approached, his face brightening visibly. Lillian, you slept well? Very well, thank you. She nodded respectfully to the chief. Thank you for your hospitality, Chief Walking Bear. The chief inclined his head in acknowledgement. One of the younger men beside him spoke in English. My father says you are welcome among our people, teacher. We have heard Silver Creek will allow our children to attend your school. You speak English very well, Lillian observed. I attended the mission school for 3 years, the young man explained. I am Robert Walking Bear. My father hopes I will help our people navigate the changing times. Hayes gestured to the map they had been studying. Robert's been showing us the areas where Bannister's men have been seen. They're concentrating around the richest coal deposits. Lillian knelt beside them to examine the map. Has there been any word from Silver Creek? A messenger arrived an hour ago, Hayes replied. Marshal Miller has his men watching all approaches to town. No sign of Bannister yet, but that doesn't mean he's not out there. Planning his next move, Lillian concluded grimly. Chief Walking Bear spoke at length in Shoshone, his expression serious. Robert translated. My father says these coal deposits have been known to our people for generations. We use small amounts for our needs, but have no desire to tear open the earth as the white miners do. He fears what will happen if men like Bannister gain control of this land. Hayes nodded solemnly. Tell your father I understand his concerns. The treaty should protect these lands from mining claims, but treaties have been broken before. What can we do? Lillian asked. Wait, Hayes said simply. Bannister will make his move soon. When he does, we'll be ready. The day passed tensely, with scouts regularly reporting from the surrounding area. Lillian spent part of the afternoon with the Shoshone children, who were curious about the school in Silver Creek. Despite the language barrier, she managed to communicate through gestures and the translation help of Robert and a few other English-speaking tribe members. As evening approached, Hayes found her sitting outside Star Woman's lodge, watching the sunset paint the mountains in golden light. You seem to have made friends, he observed, nodding toward a small group of children who waved enthusiastically at Lillian from across the settlement. She smiled. They're eager to learn. It's a shame there's been resistance to them attending school in town. Change comes slow out here. Hayes lowered himself carefully beside her, his wounded side still clearly troubling him. How are you feeling? She asked, noting the tightness around his eyes. I'll manage. He stretched his legs out before him with a sigh. Robert and the scouts haven't seen any sign of Bannister yet. Could be he's waiting for the land office to open before making his move. Or he could be planning something we haven't anticipated, Lillian suggested. Hayes nodded grimly. That's what worries me. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the light fade from the sky. Stars began to appear, brilliant against the deepening blue. It's beautiful here, Lillian said softly. So different from Boston. Do you miss it? The city, I mean. She considered the question seriously. I miss certain things, books, music, the comfort of familiar places. She glanced at him. But there's something about this country, the openness, the honesty of it, the way it demands everything from you and offers so much in return. It's not an easy place to live, Hayes said, but worth the hardship, I think. Is that why you stayed after the Rangers? You could have gone back to Texas. Hayes looked out toward the mountains, his expression thoughtful. Partly. Mostly it was about finding somewhere I could make a difference. His gaze returned to her. What about you? What brought you west to teach in a frontier town? Lillian smiled ruefully. Would you believe I was seeking adventure? Actually, yes. A rare smile lit his features. You don't strike me as a woman who shies away from challenges. My father wanted me to marry a business associate of his, a man 3 times my age with grown children. Lillian wrinkled her nose at the memory. When I refused, it created quite the scandal in our social circle. The teaching position in Silver Creek offered an escape. Brave decision, Hayes commented, coming to unknown territory alone. Or foolish, she countered, considering how it's turned out so far. Hayes's hand found hers in the gathering darkness. You've handled everything thrown at you with remarkable courage, Lillian. Don't sell yourself short. The warmth of his fingers entwined with hers sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Hayes. Whatever she might have said was interrupted by shouts from the perimeter of the settlement. Hayes was on his feet instantly, his hand going to his revolver. Robert Walking Bear ran toward them, his expression urgent. Riders approaching from the south. Many men. Hayes's face hardened. Bannister. How many? Lillian asked, rising to stand beside him. At least 10, maybe more, Robert replied. They carry torches. He means to frighten the tribe into fleeing, Hayes said grimly, then claim the land is abandoned. Chief Walking Bear appeared, speaking rapidly to his son while warriors gathered around them, weapons in hand. My father says we will not run, Robert translated. This is our land, protected by treaty. We will defend it. Hayes nodded. Tell him we stand with him, but we need to get the women and children to safety first. As the settlement mobilized for defense, Lillian helped Star Woman gather the children into the central lodge. The atmosphere was tense but controlled, the Shoshone people clearly prepared for such emergencies. Hayes found her as she was returning to help with the preparations. Lillian, you should stay with the children. I can help here, she insisted. I'm not afraid. His expression softened momentarily. I know you're not, but he hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek gently. I need to know you're safe. Please. The tenderness in his gesture took her breath away. All right, she conceded, but be careful, Hayes. You're still wounded. I plan to come through this in one piece. Something flashed in his eyes, determination, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she dared not name. We have unfinished business, you and I. Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a brief, fierce kiss. Then he was gone, striding toward the settlement's perimeter where the warriors were taking position. Stunned by the unexpected kiss, Lillian touched her fingers to her lips. In that brief moment, everything had changed between them, a declaration, made not with words but with a gesture that left no doubt about Hayes's feelings. She had little time to dwell on it as the sound of approaching horses grew louder. From the central lodge, where she joined the children and elderly, Lillian could see the glow of torches in the distance. Fear knotted her stomach, not for herself, but for Hayes and the others preparing to defend the settlement. What followed was a night of tension and sporadic violence. Bannister's men attempted to surround the settlement, but the Shoshone warriors, along with Hayes and several men from Silver Creek who had arrived to help, held them at bay. Shots were exchanged, flaring in the darkness like deadly fireflies. Lillian did her best to keep the children calm, telling stories and singing songs to distract them from the frightening sounds outside. Star Woman nodded approvingly, her weathered face stoic as she helped tend to an elderly man distressed by the conflict. Near dawn, the shooting ceased. A tense silence fell over the settlement. Lillian waited anxiously for news, her heart racing whenever footsteps approached the lodge. Finally, the entrance flap opened to admit Robert Walking Bear, his face streaked with dirt but wearing a triumphant expression. They have gone, he announced. Marshal Miller arrived with many men from Silver Creek. Bannister and his gang fled toward the mountains. Relief washed over Lillian. Is anyone hurt? Hayes? The marshal is well, Robert assured her with a knowing smile. He fights bravely for a wounded man. Lillian rushed outside, squinting in the pale light of early dawn. The settlement showed signs of the night's conflict, a few structures damaged by bullets, warriors gathered in small groups discussing the battle. She searched anxiously until she spotted Hayes, standing with Chief Walking Bear and Marshal Miller near the central fire. Hayes looked up as she approached, his face lighting with relief and something more a warmth that made her heart skip. Despite the dirt and gunpowder staining his clothes, despite the evident fatigue in his stance, he had never looked more handsome to her. Lillian, he said simply, stepping forward to meet her. You're safe. As are you, it seems. She resisted the urge to throw herself into his arms, aware of the many eyes watching them. Robert said Bannister fled. Marshal Miller nodded, adjusting his hat. Headed into the high country. We've got posses in pursuit, but those mountains are full of hiding places. Will he come back? Lillian asked. Not likely, Hayes replied, not with his plans exposed. The territorial governor's been telegraphed about the attempted land grab. There'll be federal marshals involved now. Chief Walking Bear spoke at length, his dignified bearing undiminished by the night's events. Robert translated for Lillian's benefit. My father thanks you for standing with our people. He says the teacher is welcome in our settlement any time, and our children will be proud to attend her school in Silver Creek. Lillian bowed her head respectfully. Please tell the chief I am honored by his trust. The children will be welcome at the school for as long as I am teacher there. After the chief departed with his son, Marshal Miller cleared his throat. Well, I should get back to town, organize the search parties properly. You two coming along?" Hayes glanced at Lillian, a question in his eyes. She nodded. "We'll follow shortly," Hayes told Miller. "There's something I need to discuss with Miss Barrymore first." Miller's mustache twitched knowingly. "Take your time. Town's safe enough now." When they were alone, Hayes led Lillian to a quiet spot at the edge of the settlement, overlooking the valley below. Morning light spilled across the landscape, turning the world to gold. "About last night," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Before the fighting started, You kissed me," Lillian supplied, a smile tugging at her lips. "I did." Hayes looked momentarily abashed. "It wasn't how I'd planned to, that is, I meant to be more gentlemanlike about it." "Hayes Northrop, are you apologizing for kissing me?" "No," he said quickly. "Definitely not apologizing. Just explaining that it wasn't how I intended to court you properly." Lillian's heart soared at the word court. "And how did you intend to court me, Marshal?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Dinner at the hotel restaurant in Silver Creek, maybe a dance at the next town social, calling on you at the schoolhouse with flowers now and then." "That sounds lovely," she said softly, "but I rather liked your actual method too." Hayes took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lillian, I know we haven't known each other long, and I know my life as a lawman isn't an easy one to share. But these past days with you have shown me that a future is possible, again a future I thought died with Caroline." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking for promises now, just a chance to court you properly, to see if what I feel, what I hope you feel too, can grow into something lasting." Lillian's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Hayes, when you found me on that auction block in Whispering Pines, I was at my lowest moment. I thought my dreams of a new life in the West were over before they'd begun." "And now?" he asked gently. "Now I believe they're just beginning. The right dreams, with the right person beside me." She squeezed his hands. "Yes, you may court me, Hayes Northrop, though I warn you, I may be quite easily won." His smile was radiant. "Is that so, Miss Barrymore?" "Indeed." She stepped closer, emboldened by the love she saw in his eyes. "In fact, I wouldn't object if you kissed me again. For practice, you understand. If we're to be courting." Hayes laughed, a free and joyous sound she had never heard from him before. Then he gathered her gently in his arms, mindful of his healing wound, and lowered his lips to hers. This kiss was different from the first, not a desperate farewell before battle, but a promise, tender and unhurried. Lillian felt herself melting into him, her arms winding around his neck as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "Well," Hayes said, his voice rough with emotion, "I believe we've established that courting you will be the easiest and most pleasant duty I've ever undertaken." Lillian laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Then let's begin, Marshal Northrop. Silver Creek is waiting for its new teacher, and I believe I have a classroom to prepare." They rode back to town together, the dangers of the previous days behind them. Silver Creek welcomed them as heroes, the townsfolk gathering to hear the tale of Bannister's defeat and the protection of the Shoshone settlement. In the weeks that followed, Lillian settled into her role as teacher, welcoming both the town's children and those from the Shoshone settlement into her classroom. The integration wasn't without challenges, but with Hayes' support and the backing of forward-thinking community members like Oliver Davies, progress was made. Hayes courted her just as he had promised, with dinners at the hotel restaurant, dances at town socials, and frequent visits to the schoolhouse, often with wildflowers in hand. Their courtship became the talk of Silver Creek, a romantic story that brought smiles to even the most weather-beaten faces. 3 months after their return from the Shoshone settlement, on a crisp autumn evening with the mountains ablaze in fall colors, Hayes took Lillian for a ride to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. There, with the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, he knelt before her and produced a simple gold ring. Lillian Barrymore. You came west seeking adventure and a new beginning. I came west seeking purpose after losing everything I thought mattered. We both found more than we were looking for. His voice was steady, his gray eyes clear with certainty. I love you. Will you marry me? Tears of joy blurred Lillian's vision. Yes, Hayes. With all my heart, yes. Their wedding the following spring was a community celebration, with guests from Silver Creek, the Shoshone settlement, and even Tom and Martha Jackson making the journey to witness their union. Marshal Miller stood as Hayes's best man, while Star Woman had traveled from the settlement to help Lillian prepare for the ceremony. As they exchanged vows in the small church, Hayes's voice carried clearly to the last pew when he promised to love, honor, and protect Lillian for all his days. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss Hayes gave his bride left no doubt in anyone's mind about the depth of his feelings. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Lillian continued teaching, eventually overseeing the construction of a larger schoolhouse to accommodate the growing number of students. Hayes remained Silver Creek's marshal, though his duties expanded to include training deputies and advising neighboring settlements on law enforcement. 2 years after their wedding, Lillian gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline Martha Northrop, a healthy, strong, lunged baby who entered the world with the same determination her parents had shown in finding each other. Hayes, who had feared he might never know the joy of fatherhood, found himself transformed by his daughter's tiny fingers and trusting eyes. 3 years later, a son joined their family, Thomas Davies Northrop, named for the two men who had helped make their happiness possible. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Hayes surprised Lillian with the deed to a piece of land just outside Silver Creek, where he had begun building a proper home for their growing family. No more living above the marshal's office, he told her as they stood on the rise where their house would stand. Room for the children to run, maybe some horses, even space for your garden. Lillian leaned against him, watching their children play in the spring grass nearby. It's perfect, Hayes. Everything I ever dreamed of. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. When I raised my hand at that auction and said I'd take you forever, I had no idea how much that promise would change my life. For the better, I hope, she teased, though she knew the answer. Hayes turned her to face him, his expression serious despite the smile playing at his lips. Lillian Northrop, loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life, and it's only just beginning. As the sun set behind the mountains they both loved, Hayes kissed his wife, the woman he had rescued, protected, courted, and married. The woman who had, in turn, saved him from a life of loneliness and regret. The woman he would, indeed, take forever. And in the golden light of evening, with their children's laughter carrying on the wind, they both knew that some journeys, though they begin in danger and uncertainty, lead exactly where they're meant to home, to the arms of the one who makes every risk worthwhile.